Hello, beloveds. I am Brooke Grove, near-death experiencer, healer, teacher, and author, here with my dear friend and soul brother, Peter Panagore.
Hi, Brooke. You're on the East Coast. It's great to have you here.
Yes, and I know a lot of folks know you, but for those that don't, could you briefly introduce who you are and what you do?
I am a two-time near-death experiencer. I first died in 1980 and again in 2015. I've spent most of my life integrating. I'm also a chaplain at a super maximum security prison here in Maine with the lowest recidivation rate in the entire nation by 40 points because of the way we treat the residents as human beings.
Love
Pretty
that.
proud of that, of the whole. Anyway, so I'm also an author, a best-selling author on Audible, and you can find my stories all over the place. We're not going to get into that stuff today. You should read Brooke's book. You'll find out her story there. But as for me, you're going to be able to find it all over the net, so all over YouTube. Anyway, we're
Yes.
here because, if I may boldly say, Brooke, because we are friends
Mm.
and we are integrated into the near-death community experience and our larger circle,
Mhm.
and that is soul family.
It is, it is, it is. And for those of you that don't know me yet, my NDE occurred in 2010. And I met Peter in approximately 2019. I'm pretty sure we're spot on there because we know the conference that it occurred at for the International Association of Near-Death Studies annual conference. Would you like to tell them a little bit about that? Since I was so quiet that day.
So we got invited out to dinner, maybe 40 of us, and we went to this big huge table and we're surrounding this table, and I didn't know anybody really.
Mhm.
And so, well, I knew some people, but I wasn't sitting near anybody I knew. That's more to the point. So this huge table was just in conversation all night long, and I was sitting next to one woman, and at the head of the table sat Brooke Grove, who was silent all night long, like silent. I kept looking over at her. She's like not talking. So finally, and this is it's a verbose. Everybody's excited. She's kind of like this right now. And so finally, toward the end of the night, I looked at her in the eyes and I said, "So, Brooke, do you talk?"
And I don't believe I even answered. As you describe in the foreword of my book, I nodded. But now you know I talk. I talk a lot.
You do. It was a memorable experience. And then I think that we went out for a walk at the next conference.
Mhm.
And that's kind of began our conversations. And may I say this about one of the reasons relates to your book, but mostly what I mean to say is it relates to your life,
Mm.
is that you were in a very difficult situation at this point in your life, in
Yes.
your relationship. And I spent a good part of my career working with victims of domestic violence in various capacities. And I recognized that you were in a difficult place, and I offered to be your friend as a result.
And I so appreciate that and sensed it. You know, for those of you that don't know us, Peter and I, amongst our many ND after effects, have extremely heightened intuition and an ability to read and sense and feel and interpret energy, which can be for the highest and best, and sometimes can be a little bit of a hardship, you know, especially in those early years, as we've talked about so much. So for me, it was so transformative to have someone that was further down the line as far as integration went. If my memory serves, your first NDE occurs in 1981, correct?
1980, but close enough.
1980. Okay. See, I'm inserting self here because I was born in 81 and I knew it was on the cusp. Calm down, ego. You know what it is? It's IANS. IANS began in 1981. The
Right,
organization is
right.
the same age as I am. So your NDE and the organization happened then. You grow through with them in a way. You know, they're beginning their process of really allowing NTEs to come into the mainstream and have a scientific and empirical understanding that supports this. And simultaneously, you're integrating. Whereas for me, I come into the community for the first time in 2012. It took me 2 years to come out, and I disappeared till 2019 because of or 2018 actually, because of the intensity of my after effects. So you didn't have the kind of support that was available to me.
no support at all. I was 100% absolutely on my own. And even though IANS was in existence, I had no idea even what to call what had happened to me. And I had no
Mm-hmm.
reference point in my reading. And I was an English major, so I read pretty broadly, but nothing,
Mm-hmm.
nothing except for Ralph Waldo Emerson. Ralph Waldo Emerson and at one point, he's exploring the oversoul, he called it, and after my NDE, I realized that maybe it was before. I think it was probably in my class that I came to understand that he was reading the Upanishads and the Vedas and books like that. So after my NDE, I started to look to the East and ended up going to divinity school for 3 years to get a master's in divinity, which led to ordination. But I got to say this to everybody: I'm not a believer. I was going to study the history of contemplation and mysticism, East and West,
Mm-hmm.
because I understood through Emerson that there were symbolic stories in the East that more accurately reflected what I thought had happened to me in my NDE. So on my own, I still study, and I practiced Kriya Yoga. I stumbled into Paramahansa Yogananda, and he talked about Kriya Yoga. And so I went exploring and went looking for it, and I found the Yoga Sutras by Patanjali, and I read them. I ingested and I digested and I acted in my practice. And I know that I had an extra dose when I came back. I think probably all of us do. We come back with this. For me, it was a thimbleful of the energy of the ocean of the divine, but it was still ocean water. And
And that's something I've so appreciated about you from the start. Because when I came in to the NDE community, I of course knew who you were because you were one of the notable speakers that, you would see out and about a lot. And your book was cited and you were doing interviews everywhere. And I remember, because I get up very early, that I got up. I was like one of five people that got up to do one of your meditations. And you invited me to your Kriya yoga talk and was just like, you can come, you're my guest, And I was like, you don't even know me. And so the funny part was that was before the little head nod situation. I don't think you recall that. I do.
I do
Because
now. I
to
forgot about
me,
it.
yeah, to me, that meant something because it was like, oh, here's this guy who's getting the main stage, but he's practicing what he talks. And as you know, I wrote so much about embodiment and spiritual bypassing and the disconnect that because of the intensity of my after effects and my ability to see energy, that's what sent me out of community. I like rushed into it and then I saw kind of all the chaos of what's happening with spiritual dysregulation and people still being out of their body post NDE or people, talking the vernacular but not living in alignment with it. So your personhood became kind of like the portal or the gateway, to the here and now in this conversation, and why I asked you to write the foreword because you just mean so much to me. And to me, you really are the embodiment of the message of an NDE, which is a perfectly imperfect human that's doing their highest and best to live as the unconditional love of divinity. So,
That is what I wish every NDEer would come to understand, that the practice of self I said the wrong word, that the practice of serving others, not for self, is the divine energy practice of humanity toward people, but
mhm,
toward nature, toward the planet, toward the stars, toward, not that I can impact the stars because I can't, but I can definitely impact the chipmunks
mhm.
and the birds and
Per-
the plants and my
Yes,
friends and
yeah.
everybody in humanity.
Yes, yes, and it's just such a wonderful thing, and that's why for me it was such an honor as our friendship grew and grew over the years to know that you truly are soul family. And we've spoke about that, to NDE communities, but that's really such an important thing because for me, for those of you that don't know, Peter and I were kind of catapulted into some documentaries together. It just kept happening. I was like, here he is again, here he is again, you know. And we were not filming these in the same place. We're filming them from across the country. I live in California and he's on the East Coast. And so we kept being in these situations, which would bring us back together in the physical, but it expanded our knowing of each other. And to me, it was a lot of the stuff we said off camera, relationally, talking about integration, because integration's been the core of why I speak. Integration's the core of my practice. And knowing you, I know that integration is the core of your service as well and your beingness. So those conversations, I mean, I don't remember what we were recording exactly. Again, the recording becomes like benign. It's like this thing but the conversation, and we sat there for like 8 hours talking about After Effects. It was crazy. Like barely eating some nuts in between to keep ourselves hungry. But it was so meaningful to me because it was, again, it was like every time you opened up in your candor, and you know me, I'm like no filters, I'm very raw about it. So it's like for better or worse, you're getting it all.
It's good. It's good. It's good. So that's one of the reasons why we connected, Brooke, is because you are so open about it. It took me a long time to get to that place, but I'm definitely in that place now. I hid it for 20 years. My wife knew, a friend knew, and eventually another friend knew because of a certain circumstance, an after effect that was very public.
Mm,
And meanwhile, I want to pick up the word integration
yeah.
because integration really freaking matters.
Mhm.
It's the thing. And so if you read the IANS website, you might notice that it takes something like 10 years, not you, Brooke. If a viewer, I should say that correctly, if a viewer reads the website, you'll see that it takes about 10 years to integrate.
Mhm.
And that's a serious thing. There's all this discombobulation when we come back because who am I now and what is this thing and what's consciousness, and my marriages break up. 70% of marriages after NDE break up. Now, I'm in a different circumstance because
I'm
I
in that
married my
team.
wife after my first NDE, and she already knew I was a little weird, so it wasn't news to her. But the integration aspect, I found that when I came back, I was so outside of myself, above my body,
Mhm.
that the only place that I found stability was in my interior practice of meditation, which I had already been doing for several years before I died. And it was in that quiet space that I found quiet. I found silence. I found peace. I found myself. That's really, maybe that's what I should say. I found my true self in that space. And I learned that meditation really matters. An interior journey really, really matters because, not because I'm saying this, but because around the world and all the mystical traditions. So my study in grad school and afterwards was in the mystical traditions, East and West, as I said. What I discovered was, and this isn't news to anybody who knows this already, but every single mystical tradition has an interior practice of some kind or other. They're not all the same, but they often involve body movement or still body, chanting or breath following breath, uh, that's kind of it, body, breath, and quieting the mind in all these different forms. And yeah, I had to ask myself, why is that? Why is the interior journey so important? And I came to the discovery without actually thinking through the answer. I had an experience. And that's mostly what happens with integration. There's the experience we have on the other side sort of opens up an experience here that allowed me to see more truly what it is, who I am.
Mhm. Most definitely, most definitely. I mean, when I was consciously channeling the words that have come through this year to create this book, it was absolutely essential that those practices were the architecture.
Yeah.
So every morning before creation came to being, because if you step into creation, like automatically you come from the mind, and there's like that little egoic part, that's there. But if you come through it with breath, movement, sound, energy, because I would say somatics and energetics are unified to me
Mm,
in these practices. And if you look at most of them, that's why the movement comes in, because
mm,
you're moving the energy body as you're moving the physical body. And
mm-hmm.
in a way, treating them as a matrimony, which we often do not do. So that's sacred work because we're reunifying all of the subtle fields. And then from that place, we're able to expand from here. We're able to create from here. And for the feminine, the womb as well. And so that became kind of like the holy trinity of how to open the field to support writing from the highest and best, channeling from the highest and best, and bypassing the mind. And then when the mind comes in, that's where the work of integration becomes again paramount because you're like, okay, I hear you, that's cute, but I'm not going to surrender to this. This isn't the fullest expression of my truth. And I think that's one of the great gifts of an NDE when it's embodied, when someone's walking the path of integration, is that you're able in a healthy way to split, the mental body from what the spirit wants to do and what the and have a conversation that's not pathological, that's not like, where if the mind's fighting itself, that can be a very disharmonious experience. But when you're able to say, hey, my spirit knows that unconditional love is the answer to everything. But my mind is not being the most loving part of me right now. And my body is tensing up because of this disqualified vibration. How may I get them back into alignment? And that's when you're like, oh, well, I have these tools. Or as my former teacher, Peter Levine, said, I have this play box. And what
Mm.
toys do I want to pull out of my play box to get back into regulation, to get back into spiritual harmony? So I really feel, when you talk about integration, and it's kind of like a spiral. I hear people when they come to me at least, and I know you've worked with near-death experiencers around the world as well. They often kind of seem to think there's an end line, you know? The end line's death, beloveds. So it's kind of to me this it's the language of the universe. It's a spiral. We're going in and we're going out, we're going in and we're going out, and we're always creating. But we will always be integrating as long as we're humaning.
How well said. The whole schmear, Brooke. That
Thank
was
you.
beautiful and accurate and articulate. Whew.
Thank you, beloved. So I so appreciate that. And I mean, I just really want to normalize for all of our experiencer friends that may receive this. Like, again, yours was in 1980, mine's in 2010. We're having this conversation when we've spiraled a lot. For better and worse,
Oh
we have
yeah.
spiraled a lot. So if you're new and you are spiraling and you feel alone, there are people like us that have spiraled a lot, and you can reach out to us. And that's really why we speak. It's why we write stories. It's really, it's not, I know it gets a misnomer in the mainstream that it's egoic, but it's really about service. It's about spreading that message. And for me, in particular, it's about saying, I'm very much still human. I'm not like some holy being because that gets projected on us sometimes. Like we're
Yeah.
like, wondrous, luminous, and I'm like, no, I'm so human. I mean, even the title of my book reflects upon that because we all have broken, tender parts. And we all have to revisit those wounds. And we have to integrate and integrate and integrate all over again when they get activated. And that I don't feel that shifts whether your NDE was in 1980 or 2010 or 2026.
Yeah. I do keep revisiting. Well, let me put it this way. I continue to open old trauma and
Mhm.
see how it's still informing my thinking and my behavior in the world. And so, what I did do as part of my practice over decades, not consistently, but here and there, I went to therapy.
Mhm.
I went to therapy to kind of, and I would never tell my therapist what had happened to me because I was not out of the closet. But
Mhm.
I began facing the traumas of my life because the shadow side of who we are, it still informs our, it still informed my thinking and my behavior in the world, even though I'd entered into a state of communion with a big U, communion, union with the divine,
Mhm.
I still came back as you said, humaning. I'm always humaning, and the practice, which is why I still meditate. I don't have to meditate in order to find the place of balance now. I meditate. I continue to meditate to be in the energy body, to continue to access the energy body, because as you said, the somatic and the soul, they're intimately connected, and as you move the physical body, you actually access this, what I term the subtle body, which you could call the energy body, because that's who I actually am. And so by bypassing, using my body as a meditative tool, I access the energy of my higher true self. And that is really where the integration comes with, along with non attachment to self. The other thing that there are many things that meditation or some practice can benefit, but the non attachment to self in combination with the energy practice, because now I don't have to filter. Now I understand how not to filter the energy through my lower self. Because when I filter it through my lower self, it becomes infected with me. And I am, because I'm still humaning, I don't want to do that, because it
Yes, I love that. I love that infected with lower me. That's so resonant. I so feel it. And I feel another part that's wondrous about meditation in whatever lineage or, tradition, you follow or practice, is that for near-death experiencers, it allows us to return to the formless.
yeah.
And that's like, being human is such a like, material, like the body, the mind, like it's so almost like a dichotomy to the experience of being on the other side and just being like, with the infinite all of everything and being expansion and just consciousness.
Mm.
And so for me, meditation allows me to go back into that place, like microdoses of being there and remembering that that's what I truly am. Like that's the core of my beingness. This is all the temporal dance. And both are sacred. Both are sacred. I
Yes,
think
definitely.
as NDEers, sometimes, we hear from audiences that haven't had the experience of how, they're almost seeking it. And you and I always tell them, you don't want to die to get this information. Like there are healthier, easier ways to get there. And I think meditation is a great doorway for that. And I want to circle back. You brought up a good point with therapy. I, as many of you know, am a former psychotherapist. So for me, being that I was trained to pathologize this sort of stuff, especially back in when I was in school. I mean, my first graduate degree was in 2006, 20 years ago. Okay. And then I was in my doctoral program in 2010 when my NDE occurs. So for me, I was a clinical psychologist in a very competitive, prestigious program. And so as a clinician, we were taught that anything mystical or even transpersonal, which is now being allowed in mainstream psychology, but then it was like if you brought that up, you were not in the club, you were not on the team, you didn't have a white coat and fancy credentials because they just didn't allow that. Okay.
Right.
There
Right.
was such a bias. I mean, APA still has a bias against transpersonal methodologies. That said, I didn't feel safe in therapy because I thought like a therapist. I was trained that way. So I was stigmatizing and pathologizing myself.
Yeah.
So for me, it was very essential, and this might resonate with some persons that receive this, that I look at alternative types of therapies. Somatic experiencing came out at that time, and that was very beneficial to me because it was using the body to deal with the clinical wounding and the traumas. Psychedelics came through in different states at that time for legal use. That was revolutionary. Feminine studies, which had kind of been like, fringe or to the side or to people that were really solely focused on it, started to become more mainstream.
Mm.
So that allowed those paths to open up. So quite often, I think it's great that we talk about therapy because I think that's where people need to go if they don't have anybody to talk to. But what I love about this awakening world is now that we have more and more alternative therapies that are supporting the mystical experience and the integration. And I know for me, it was kind of a combination of all of them because I eventually started throwing in an EDMR and,
Mm.
more traditional, but they were new at the time. They didn't exist. When my coma happened, they weren't around in the mainstream. Now they're everywhere. So we're very fortunate that there's more and more expressions of how we may choose to integrate. And you didn't quite have that. So kudos to you for getting
No,
through it.
I went to the ancient mystics because they were the only ones who were felt like my peer group. And I figured if there were people like me, that's the first thing I was doing is I was looking to see in the history of the world was anybody like me, because I knew that I was completely different from everybody else. And I want to say when I was in therapy, I never ever ever brought up my mystical stuff, not once,
Yeah.
not ever,
Yeah.
because I didn't want to be pathologized.
I did, and I was pathologized, and I went from therapist to therapist, and I know how they're trained, and I know what their notes mean. So you can write in code and I can read it. And so it was a very upsetting experience because I believed so much in psychology. I mean, I was really married to the science. And then it felt like a betrayal when I couldn't confide in her. So that's kind of really how my
Right,
integrative practice was
right.
born because I chose to walk away and say, this is real. I'm living it. And there's other people like me. Come find me. So we've grown through our integration and made it part of our service and part of our path. And I'm so grateful that my experience connected me to all these wonderful people who are changing the paradigm, who are consciously evolving it so that we're bridging that gap in care that divides science and spirit. Because truthfully, to me, they're just different languages of God. And but they're all one because to me everything, all comes back to creator. And so I just really it's just wonderful. I would have never thought when I was a first, stepping into my NDE development that I would be talking to, a mystic friend from Yale and being able to have conversations where we're like unified. Because I was coming from such a dogmatic, worldview when I first woke up. I was still very much like materialism, which was very hard to integrate. And that's
Yeah.
so much of, the story that I've been sharing with folks over the years is, I had this ineffable experience that changed everything and taught me the truth of divinity as I know it. And yet I came back to a very fragmented mind that was dogmatic in its worldviews and that did not believe in this extraordinary phenomena that I was recurrently experiencing.
Mm.
So I just again want to thank you for, being a way shower in that way and supporting me as I began to share my voice more and more, which is precisely why I asked you to write the forward because I feel like more than anyone in our community. And I mean, we love so many people. The NDE fam, I mean, we spoke about it last year. They're everything, and it's a great group to be in. Yet out of that family, I feel like you've had the capacity and the opportunity to witness much more of my journey intimately because I've shared it with you.
Yeah.
So if you want to speak to that or the forward or what or your journey with that, because your words were or they're so important to me. I'm so honored that they get to open my book. So thank you. But just what that was like for you and being a somewhat more of an elder and year. Just a little.
uh, the what you mentioned the word, and one of the things that I began to pay attention to was your Instagram page where you were publishing your poetry. And I mentioned I was an English major. Words and language and storytelling is something that I've been studying the whole of my life and love storytelling. And your poetry, the structure of your poetry, the meaning of your poetry, the words you chose, the subject matter you chose to explore, the way you explored it, uh, revealed to me the not only the capacity, the literary capacity and creativity that you have, but the depth of your soul and your intellect's ability to express the difficult, almost impossible expression of NDE as it relates to living this life. And so as I read your work repeatedly, I gave you a nickname, which is poet.
Did.
And this was years ago. And I wouldn't call you anything other than that for a period of
I
time.
know. I would walk down the halls and people are like, there's the poet. I'm like, Peter.
And I did that on purpose. I did that on purpose because I wanted to encourage your pen.
I appreciate
I had a few people in my life who encouraged my pen, and I wanted to encourage yours because it's rare to run across somebody, in my humble opinion, who has a depth of character, an understanding of a, a self, and that's a self that's been in trauma, going through trauma, and also working through it, and a higher connection to the divine. Um, that's a rare thing, in my opinion. Um, I wrote the I was pleased and honored to be invited to write the foreword. That's the first thing I should say. Um, the What I wrote in the foreword is what I see of your growth, your transformation, and that's really important to me. You walked away from your future. You didn't just leave your doctoral program. You walked away from your future because of your near death experience. The transformation that occurred in you is very similar to a transformation that occurred in me. So in when I look at you, I see a similarity in that regard as well. So I walked away from an architectural future with my family business
Mhm.
because of my NDE, and I went an entirely different route. Um, well, that's another reason why I wrote the forward, because your continual ability to wrestle with your higher nature, but to the ego's mind is the true nature of oneself, as the lower mind wrestles with that, is fascinating to watch because you don't give up. You haven't given up your entire life. After reading your book, you persevered through incredible trauma that I didn't know about. I didn't know all these details when I read your book. I knew, I knew some stuff, but we talked a lot about your current situation,
Mhm.
facing what you were facing, and I had some hints about who you had been through the years. But my takeaway from reading your book, one of my takeaways, is that you continue to allow yourself to be transformed, and that is, and you did it by directing, by understanding that you had been changed, and that by directing not at your egoic self, but at the divine, as expressed through your individual personhood.
Mhm.
But that's the biggest difference that I see, um, between the real true mystics in history and those who are in it for their own egoic self-expression,
Mhm.
and that to always point at oneself. You can't help but point at oneself.
Mhm.
You were in the I was in television, and when I first got into TV, it turned out I was the frickin' brand. Like I was so resistant to that.
Mhm.
I had to accept it because that was my job.
Mhm.
But it was never ever about me. Not today, not the day that I came back from my first ND. It's always about the divine, and to quiet the mind down, to recognize one's trauma, to go through the journey of that with persistence and strength and drive and courage and raw femininity, in your power
Mhm.
as a woman.
Mhm.
Um, well, that's always just been impressive to me. So
Oh.
that's why I was like, yeah, I'll write your forward. Um, you can read the forward in the book if you
Yes,
want to.
the book, which just came
Right,
out on July
right.
29th.
And I love the art. Oh my God, the art on the cover.
The
David,
art, we've got to give a shout out to David Ditchfield. Another NDE family member, did an exquisite job on this. Just exquisite. He and I are gonna have a conversation about this too, but the only real requirement I gave him was that there were roses. And then I gave him the title. Run with it.
perfect.
It's on
Perfect.
trauma transcendence. Go play.
Perfect.
But
Perfect.
it came, I mean, it came out beautifully and your words at the beginning. So yes, The Beauty in the Broken Glass, Memoirs of Trauma and Transcendence is now live on Amazon. So just such an honor having that. And you know, you brought up the something about, well, we were talking about putting our stories out there. When you were writing your book, that whole part about service. That was huge for me. So, you know, a lot of people, like as we said before, they think of this as like an egoic thing. And I found it to be such the opposite. Because in
Mm-hmm.
order for it to serve, when the ego would flare, that's when those integration playbox toys had to come out so that I could get back in resonance with service. So the honesty of it, was there like, is there a way that you approach that? Like the vulnerability, because this is a very vulnerable thing. You know,
Mm.
there are things in here that I never intended to publicly share. You know, that's why you didn't know, you know, for such a long time.
Yeah,
You didn't know. No one
right.
did. I'm getting
Right.
messages all the time
Right.
right now, like, whoa, you know? But the stepping into that honesty while still being human.
I felt like I was compelled. I had the day after I died, I was hitchhiking back from the mountain range after a car wreck. And I didn't die in the car wreck. That was just an added trauma to the experience. So I'm hitchhiking back into the United States, and there was this loud roaring sound inside of me that overwhelmed me and continued to overwhelm me for months. And it had no sound, no words.
Mhm.
It spoke in the demand of serving itself.
Mhm.
Me, I am it serving itself, and
Mhm.
also to serve humanity. And
Mhm.
those two things came back with me, and among many other things. But those two things are, well, it made me rebellious. It made me like say, I bite my thumb at you. No
We
way, I'm
have
not
that
doing
in
that.
common, Peter.
Right.
That's another one of our connectivity
You
points.
totally do. I was pretty angry that I agreed to. I didn't read the small print when I agreed to come back. Right?
Oh,
Okay.
me too.
So I was pretty upset about it, and I felt like I was given no word. I would no. I didn't feel like I was given no words. I was given no words. There are no words for the ineffable, and
Mhm.
yet I was demanded to portray, to speak, to live, and so I understood immediately that kindness, compassion, uh, relationship, community, uh, all those things and more, that when I was in those contexts, and sometimes they often overlapped, when I was in those contexts, I found that the flow of the divine came out of me naturally.
Mhm.
If I stood out of the way, if I got my ego self out of the way, then it became like another form of prayer for me.
Mhm.
And so when I didn't go to uh, Georgia Tech, where I had been accepted for architecture school. I did go to Yale, and I worked in resettling refugees from Cambodia for the first year,
Mhm.
and then I began. It introduced me to the homeless community in New Haven, and so I started volunteering with the homeless shelters and the soup kitchens, and in that capacity, I found this deep expression of my understanding of the radical equality of humanity, that these broken men and women were me, and
Mhm.
their beauty of the light energy inside of them was also me. And so I came to understand that the service of others to others serves the divine. It is what Jesus was talking about.
Mhm.
Uh, who was uh, brother to the man, uh, the Samaritan guy, the enemy person, and because kindness and compassion is an action of the divine expression of the energy itself. And so that became real to me. And I want to say this about my divinity degree and my work in Christianity. is that I found the Jesus I studied when I went to Catholic high school was not the Jesus I read when I came back and cracked the book open again. He's like he's totally not what's taught in the evangelical churches
Yeah.
at all. He is a singleness teacher, a oneness teacher who had a transformative experience himself,
Mhm.
and it was showing that the way out was the way in. And I took him at his word, along with a bunch of other people.
I love
And
that you said that because, my work as I speak to in the book and as I've spoken to much publicly too, for years I was very aligned with and learning from and sourcing from the divine feminine. And it was all about the ascended masters kind of in that realm. And
mm,
so as a what I call recovering Catholic, when Yeshua starts coming through, like in everything, I'm all like, no, no, like been
I hear
there,
you.
done that,
Yeah.
But for me, Mother Mary had been with me my whole life, and I talk about it in depth in the book. And she'd been really a spiritually transformative experience that was recurrent, in my traumas and overdoses and, suicidality and some things like that. It was always her. So eventually the ego started to soften, like, well, it makes sense her son would show up too, like, and I started to understand, which is why I use the term Yeshua over what I was indoctrinated with, because for me, it allows me to flavor the Christ that I know versus the one that I was taught.
Yeah. Two different things altogether.
But it was really his energy, or that energy of Christ consciousness, that light, that oneness that you've spoke to so eloquently. It was that paired with the raw Shakti.
Oh yeah.
That was what became the saving grace. Like, I would have never been able to consciously channel this book and go through the traumas and share all of this as raw and vulnerably and openly had I not spent the time constantly pairing those two energies. Because for a long time, I was just like raw Shakti, and like that can get really disembodied. And that
Mm,
can be really
mm,
taxing on the physical and the
hmm.
energy and the mind. So it was really stepping into that sacred father energy, or that Christ consciousness, or that Jesus or Yeshua energy, that then was able to be like, well, there's balance when you combine these two forces, And so many of the traditions tell us this, but when we're a new experiencer and we're traumatized, we're not going to naturally gravitate to the one that aligns with what we perceive of the abuser.
Right.
And
Of
so,
course not.
though it had nothing to do with the traditions themselves, it came more from religious trauma
Yeah.
and the fact that my traumas occurred in the hands of men. And I would love to say, to expand upon the soul family, that's part of why our platonic friendship has been so important to me. Because, when there's a lot of masculine wounding and someone comes in and they actually show you the antidote to that, that they are the embodiment of a masculine presence that's doing the work and is safe. And that becomes a very emotionally corrective, healing experience. And that's why the people that I asked to co-create with me on this project were all people that became safety to me, in the hopes that the words would become safety to others, and that our vibration together in creating it from the truth of our very different and yet very similar near-death experiences and integration paths would be felt. That would be
Mm.
something that's transmitted in the totality, from David's art to your foreword to my words. Because it really, to me, and this was my highest intention when I chose to be an indie author and do it my way, because I'm a rebel, is that if it's made from love, wholehearted love, unencumbered, raw, visceral, palpable love, then the only thing it can serve is what it's made from.
That
So,
is exactly what I would say myself.
So
Oh,
I so
I'm sorry. The screen stopped and I didn't
I
even hear you
know, I know.
talking.
I saw it
I'll
too.
shut up.
We've actually
Sorry.
had a lot of after effects with the lighting too. I don't know if you've noticed. I'm like, at least we haven't crashed it all. So we have a tendency, beloveds, to shut technology down. I'm envious you can use headphones and microphones. It doesn't go well for me.
I'll tell you that when I was in television, I in the studio they tried to use a remote mic on me, and they're like, "What's wrong with this mic?" And it was weeks, and the mic's broken, the mic's broken, the mic's broken. But didn't the weather guy use it? Didn't the and then they had to hardwire me because they couldn't. I blocked the signal,
We
and
are,
so
we yeah.
I'm not actually touching this
Yeah.
thing.
We're like a wild frequency, guys.
Yeah.
You're getting a lot here. So you might want to go drink some water and get grounded after you listen to us.
Oh
Well,
yeah.
I'm just so grateful that we got to just kind of like share some history, some near-death knowledge together today. And thank you again for supporting my book. But most of all, thank you for being my friend and soul brother. It's the deepest honor, and you've taught me so much. And I feel like we've grown together in a
Oh
way,
yeah,
you
for
know,
sure.
like it's like, now I feel like I would have something to say at that table, but you know me, I was studying. I was still in that
Mm,
scientific, do I
mm.
want to participate in this? Because that was the year I first spoke. So the irony is I got up the next morning and spoke on stage.
Oh,
But
that's true.
yeah, so I
I
did.
went to that.
Yes, I spoke, but it took time for me to get really comfortable in being the main stage. And,
Did I go to that, Brooke?
I don't know if it was that year. I think because
I don't think I.
that's the year I spoke with Allison.
Yeah,
So
I
I
didn't go
think
to
you
that.
came
I
to
wanted to
all the
correct
next
myself.
one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
I was thinking, but I get confused with years and what I remember conferences by what city we were in.
Oh
Like
yeah, me
that's the
too.
only way, but I think my favorite part of every conference has always been our walks.
Oh yeah, I agree. I agree.
So thank you, because I think that's when we just like it's kind of like we're away from that energy. We're
Hmm.
just being ourselves, but we're also processing like in that year where we are. So thank you for walking and growing with me. Thank you for writing my foreword. Thank you for taking the time today because I just feel the honesty of our conversation and showing relationship within the community is a medicinal thing because I can tell you, dear viewers, for a long time I isolated. For a very long time on my NDE, again, 2010, it's not till 2019 that I start making these connections.
Hmm.
So I have kind of a split experience of pure isolation and where I am now. And I just want to encourage you, whether it's online, whether it's through our talks and podcasts that everyone puts out so lovingly, but to find connections because that resonance, that knowing that you are not alone is medicine and it will be your security blanket when integration gets rough. And as we've said over and over, it spirals. So, any closing words, my dear friend?
So I was fortunate to study under a storyteller named Brother Blue
Mm,
in Boston, and this is what he would do at the end. This is my final comment. Well, maybe
okay.
not my final, but he at the end of his stories, and he was a mystic. Anyway, he'd go, and everybody in the crowd would be in the state of awe with him.
I love
And
that.
I'm in the state of ah with you. And
Oh,
I guess the last thing I will say is that when I was dead, my subtle body had no gender. I had no substance. I was just divine being. And when I look at you, Brooke, I see what you see because the light sees itself. I see you, and
thank you.
you,
And
I'm
I've
so
always
glad you're
felt
my
that
friend.
with you. I have to say, like, there's a lot of talk in spiritual communities about that, but having you have been with me through my highest and best and witnessing various things, you've always held that presence. And I hope I've held it for you as well. So
Hmm.
thank you ever so much. Thank you to everyone that tunes into this. Drop some love in the comments, a like. We appreciate it. It honors the energy exchange. I really love to hear from all of you experiencers how this lands because it helps us know, what to share. But we really are putting this out from our hearts. We love you, and I'm wishing everyone a most beautiful day. Bye for now.